Hey everybody, Dr. Patty Fletcher here, and welcome to Recognize This. We here at Work Human have a saying, you just saw it in that awesome commercial. I love that commercial. I can't get enough of it. That without the human, it's just work. And that's exactly what Recognize This is about. It's about those workplace trends that are going on to make the workplace more human for everybody who works for a living. And my goodness, that has never been more important, not only for those of us who are in HR, but those of us who just work, period, whether we are people leaders or we are individual contributors. Humanity at work is finally front and center. And boy, have we got a great discussion for you today. If you are here, tell me who you are. Tell me where you're joining us from. Well, hello there, Stephanie Goodell. So great to see you. Where are you joining us from, Stephanie? I know, but the others don't. And if you have any questions for my guest and I today, put them right into the chat. We will get to as many questions as we can, and those we can't get to, we will follow up with you directly. So stop by, tell us who you are, tell us where you're joining us from, and tell us the questions you have, the comments you have. It looks like we have Kawanda White. Hi there. Nice to meet you. I love your name. Fantastic. So why are you here today, and what are my guest and I talking about? Well, we're talking about what everybody in the business of people, I'm talking about, and that is the Great Resignation. As a marketer, I love the catchy name. As a person who works for a living, I don't love the reality about it. But guess what? When you create a more human workplace, you have got this nailed. It becomes your competitive differentiator in the Great Resignation. So let's start with what exactly the Great Resignation is. It's actually a term that came from economists. What's happening now, we're all experiencing it. You cannot have a conversation with any business leader inside or outside of HR without the topic coming up. And that is millions and millions of people are looking at work and the role it plays in their lives very differently now. A pandemic will do that to you, right? Being locked inside, bringing your work home literally with you, working long hours. Sure, we are used to high turnover here in HR, especially in kind of retail or hourly work kinds of industries. But my goodness, when we see highly paid technology coders quitting their jobs because they don't love being treated as machines themselves, we know we have a challenge. And by the way, we also have an opportunity. And there is no one better to talk about the Great Resignation, to talk about how even within that, we have opportunities to have retention with our top talent, to keep them engaged, to keep them productive, to attract top talent when you are a human workplace. And the person that is joining me today is one of my dearest friends here at Work Human, Mr. Chris French, who is responsible for all things customer. This guy is so tuned into the industry, so tuned into market, and so tuned into what is on the hearts and minds of our CHROs. Chris, come on in and join me in our virtual room. And while we're waiting for Chris, let's see, we also have, hey, Stephanie, love that you're joining from Boston in Strategic Talent Management. Awesome title. We have Martina Campbell. Hi there, joining us from Ireland. Oh my goodness. Hopefully you are joining us with a glass of Guinness or something. Martina, let us know what questions we can answer for you. And thank you, Stephanie. I will plug into that question with the team. And Kevin, thank you for joining us from Seattle. Hi, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Patty. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone online.
And for those of you who are regulars joining in, you might recognize Chris. He has joined me here before and recognize this. He's actually a regular guest here. I speak with him once a quarter to understand what's really going on in the industry. What are those trends when it comes to talent management, when it comes to the business of people? What are he seeing that's working, what we could do better at? More importantly, where are the opportunities to thrive? So, Chris, before we jump into the meat of the topic, can you tell the folks who've joined us today a little bit about yourself? And, you know, despite, Chris, I don't know if you know this, despite me having worked remotely pretty much all of my career until I came to Work Human, which was remote because of the pandemic. I thought I had this remote thing covered when it came to human connection. And I've learned some pretty incredible hacks from you, how to keep that human connection going, how to keep productivity going with some hybrid hacks. So if you wouldn't mind in part of your intro, also sharing some of your little tidbits of hybrid hacks would be really interesting for us.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So really excited to be here. Thank you. Patty is also one of my favorite people, so I feel obligated, since you said such a nice thing about me, Patty, that to share the truth about you as well. The way I tell people about what I do is that it's my job to translate the great culture we have at Work Human into the cultures of our customers. And so all the teams that launch and service and grow and strategize with our customers, as well as those responsible for how that feels along the journey, and the data science area. So all the things that we can learn from the millions and millions and millions of moments that happen between individuals. What can we learn about what works and what doesn't? And make sure that that informs our technology, informs our practices, and the guides that we give to our customers and out to the world. And so, it's one of the things that I've been pushing this rock up a hill for 10 years. I think you alluded to it, that the world is starting to come around to this idea that we need to create a human workplace. And so I'm so optimistic about the future and so positive about the direction that we're going. I know that we've gone through a lot of pain in order to sort of get to this point. But let no good crisis go to waste. We have to take advantage of it. And I think that that's super exciting. I do want to take a little bit of, you asked me about sort of hybrid and remote work. And I, just as an aside, I kind of think those terms are really overused right now, and they're probably not an accurate reflection of the world. Like hybrid and remote implies that there's like these two options. And in reality, I think the term that a lot of people are starting to use is dynamic work, which is, it's changing. It depending on who you are, where you are, what the time is, what's happening in your geographic region at that time. The reality is that the work doesn't have this fixed place, and I think it's oversimplifying it to sort of talk about it as remote or hybrid. And so when we go forward, maybe we'll talk about it as dynamic. But my productivity tip, I would say there's a couple. I think one is a leader. We don't get as much because everybody wants to book a meeting for everything. I think it's critically important that you do two things as a leader. One is that I've had success with. One is open office hours, and the other is team huddles. So just reminding everybody on a regular basis that you're part of a bigger group, you're not alone, and the pulse and the fun and the celebrations and little things like that on a regular basis in huddles. And having open office hours so that somebody doesn't have to book a 30-minute meeting with you just to ask you a question, I think in a remote environment is particularly important. I think here at home, I have two spaces, one where I do my work and one where I do my thinking. And you might say, what, your thinking isn't work? But when I do actual computer work, and I know that a lot of people like me don't necessarily have a lot of space. So when I say I have two spaces, one is on one side of the desk and one is on the other side of the desk. But the ability to mentally create those spaces for yourself, like you would, like in an office where you might take the time to go get a coffee or just go for a quick walk outside or something. You have to create those moments intentionally in your remote environment. Otherwise, you just kind of get stuck in a rut. So those are two hacks for a dynamic workplace world.
I love it. There's so much in there. I love what you said about dynamic. And I think that's such a great metaphor for where HR has been for a long time and really driving home today, which is we have given as an industry very ERP kind of technology, the one size fits all, process, as our boss calls it, the plumbing and electricity, right? And the truth is we humans, within our own lives, one size doesn't fit all on any given day, to your point. So I love that because it's really driving that home in terms of it's not just about benefits, options, and that. It's also about understanding people's lives change throughout the day. They change throughout their life cycle. They change throughout the context. And we have to be able to accommodate for that, right? Meeting people where they are. The other big takeaway that I like to think about, Chris, in terms of either side of your desk, you're either facing my book or my book is behind you. So that's fantastic.
Look here, Patty, don't worry. I always have it available in case I need to put up there and shine a light on somebody,
I love it. What a disruptor. So, oh my goodness, Chris, we have so many great people joining us here today. My gosh, we have Karen. Oh, Kawanda, love it. Love Houston, Texas. We have a Venezuelan joining from Santiago in Chile. Lena's Wrath. Len Nazareth. I am so sorry. I just butchered your name. Awful. You call me whatever you want as a result, my friend. Stephanie, really great question. And it's something, Stephanie, got one of the folks who's listening in here, Chris, just put in, she's curious how to get managers to pay attention to the reality of what's happening in connections between feelings, right, being cared for at work. And there's something that my buddy here, Chris French, said, Stephanie, to me, a few months ago when he had just, he spends his days talking to really smart people who do really smart executive things when it comes to the business of people. And, Chris, I remember you saying this. I think we might have been in an executive meeting where we all got a pencil out and did one of the many quotable quotes from you. And that is, the pandemic has forced us to see that our employees are actually unhuman. And I'm paraphrasing, but basically we can no longer unsee the fact that our employees are human. So Stephanie, what you just talked about is exactly the kinds of things that Chris and I are going to talk about. Really, really good point. Who else do we have here? We have Sherry that is joining us from Orlando, Florida, right with you, Sherry, all about the dynamic work. Oh my God, Chris, are you better at pronouncing names than I am? Ella, I'm sorry, Ella, it's Guy. Yeah. And then can you help me with cultural difficulties? Oh yeah, we'll be talking about those. So why don't we dive right in? So Chris, I love your hacks, by the way, right? Because it is about human connection. I started doing the open office hours. I love that. It's phenomenal. It really does give us an opportunity to not necessarily replace the hallway conversations, but for those ad hoc. It's so important. We know people are not, we're going to have questions throughout the day. We need to be able to ask them to the people who can give us the answers. But, this dynamic work environment, I don't feel like that's going to go anywhere. That is going to continue to evolve and just be a natural part of kind of the workplace. So we have to be able to accommodate for that. And the employee, because of this, has never been more important than ever. It looks like I'm having connection issues, so hopefully you guys can hear me. So when it comes to the voice of the employee, when it comes to the dynamic work environment, how can companies do what you just talked about and stay on the pulse of how their employees are feeling, so much so that they're actually able to do something about it?
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important question. It kind of goes to the question that we had a little bit earlier, which is that, it's funny because everybody has an opinion on this. So I saw a recent Gartner article that talked about like effective employee voice measurement, and even that term, employee voice measurement, is so impersonal. It's hilarious, but relies on three kind of temporary or types of feedback, like direct, indirect, and inferred. But if you think about, what I would have done 2 years ago is I would walk around the office and I would look at people and I could look at their faces, and I would go into the cafeteria, or I would just chat them up and just to get a feel for, how they're doing, what they're, and you could see the people that were struggling or were either struggling with something sort of work or personally or et cetera. And you can kind of pull on those threads and listen and understand. And we don't have those same tools available to us right now. I think that, when we try to do these things, we always try to do them en masse. So like, okay, we're not going to measure the employee voice once a year. We're going to have an employee survey, a pulse survey tool, which I think is fantastic and is important to constantly measuring, how people are feeling. And there are, tools out there. We have our own tool called Mood Tracker, as you know. And I think, but we have to be way more intentional about listening. And I don't mean like capturing voice. I mean the listening part, right? Mm-hmm. Creating these moments where you can kind of check in on people. So regular check-ins with people, regularly trying to understand what people are doing. And then looking at all the other, like I always find it fascinating, like, sometimes when I see things like employee survey tools or pulse survey tools, it implies that that's the only way that you can know what's going on. We have to make it our mission, all the people who are leaders and everybody's job, to be looking right now and being very intentional about listening to how people are doing, who's struggling. So if you're doing things like open office hours and huddles, who's there and who's not, those kinds of things. But the other thing that, I'm really cognizant about because of the job that I do, which is that when you run like customers of ours who run like recognition programs or celebration programs or milestone programs or those kinds of things, you have reams and reams of real-time data about what is happening between the people when you're not looking. And I spent a lot of time last year looking at that data in 2020 and seeing how the sentiment in the world was changing. And we just had our own little innovation Olympics, so to speak, for my team. And one of the teams built this natural language processing tool that looks at an organization's recognition and milestone moments and those types of things and measures the sentiment over time. So there's lots of different ways that we can use real-time data to get a feel for what's happening. But I think the heart of it goes to, I think it was Stephanie who asked the question earlier, is that we have to be way more intentional and give way more tools and way more training to everyone in our organization to be listening and not waiting for HR to capture the voice of the employee and then, 6 months later after analysis, say the world is moving way, way too quickly. If you're in a dynamic workforce, everybody needs to play a role in intentionally listening. And you have to create, everywhere where you have real-time data, you have to be looking at it, and you have to be looking at it in real time so that you can find that you can't find out that particular area had morale problems 6 months afterwards because half the people left.
Yeah,
right?
It's too late. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We're not going to have that luxury. This is a new world. It needs new tools.
Yeah, it needs new tools. Right on. And, Kevin, I love your question around learning about the approaches that we have here at WorkHuman that our customers use to create those moments that matter, those cultural moments Chris just talked about. That ultimately, Chris, I feel like just in working with you and working with the customers, the moments that matter are the ones that are tied where how people interact, how they do their jobs together, how they collaborate, that you're seen in how you do that based on the values of a company, the value-based behavior. So that's where we bring that individual culture with the collective culture. The work that you're doing, how it works, how it's contributing not only to like the goals and the strategy of the company, but the health and well-being of the people around you. It sounds pretty deep, but it's true. And what you had just talked about is so critical. You're not talking about listening to surveil. You're talking about listening to learn and doing it in real time. And that's huge. So Kevin, when I think about the moments that matter, what's been interesting here to me is, being in the world of people for a really long time. One thing I know personally as an employee and also just in talking with folks is people very rarely know the values of their company. They don't necessarily even know the mission statement. When it comes to like a WorkHuman experience, like you just talked about, Chris, they are all tied to the value-based behaviors. People know what's expected of them. And we get an understanding of what's motivating them to do more of that or less of that. How are they feeling about how other people are interacting with them when it comes to collectively pushing a boulder from the bottom up to the top of the hill? It's amazing to be able to feel seen in those worlds. To do that in a dynamic workplace, it's a Herculean effort, but we can make it a hell of a lot easier by focusing on the people piece, not just the process piece. It's massive. And with that, I'd love to understand, okay, so we figure out what people are feeling, what's motivating, what's demotivating. We figure it out in real time. What's a way business leaders then can start making those real-time immediate improvements, to your point, that don't take 6 months to plan and come to fruition?
Yeah. So, obviously there's probably a lot of answers to, or people would have a lot of ideas. So, and you have me on here to share my ideas on that. Right. Yeah. And I think that what we work with people on is the idea of understanding what good looks like. And then giving power to everybody in the company to reinforce it, giving them the tools and the resources to be able to say, hey, that seems like what we talked about when we said being customer focused, or that's what integrity looks like in this organization. If that's a,
Yeah.
there's a whole side conversation that 80% of companies have integrity as one of their core values, but nobody can actually explain what it means.
Mhm.
But the reality is that it's manifested in how people are doing, and so it would be very different if you're working in a call center than, let's say, that you're working out in a mine somewhere off the coast of some place.
Mhm.
But I think that the point that I would make is that this idea of giving the power to the people to recognize when good happens, the cumulative impact of those positive, the reason that people do it, it's not because the company told them to do something, or like everything that we want people to do. If managers would only do everything that we tell them to do, everything would be fine. But the
Yeah.
reality is, this is like chocolate. Once people are giving and receiving, as an example, positive reinforcement, you don't have to continue to, tell them about it. It becomes self-sustaining. And so if you focus all of those positive moments on the core values of the organization, then you can push the culture in the direction you want. Layer in other things like celebrating together as a team accomplishments that we had together, or celebrating people's life, like things that happen in their life, like or things that happen, milestones throughout their work environment, and maximizing and amplifying each one of those moments. There are tools and approaches to do this, and we know I have 148 slides of scientific proof that this radically decreases the probability that a person leaves the organization, radically increases the resilience of the organization, their feeling of belonging, being part of a team, increases the probability that they'll actually perform better in the things that you want them to do. And this is now the kind of thing that I've been talking about this for a long time, and we've been able to prove that it works. And the companies that are thriving already get that. They're doing these things. Then when they have to push the culture in a different direction, they've got the tools and the infrastructure there to be able to go, okay, now this is the thing that I want you to reinforce with positive reinforcement. And you might say, well, in any one instance, it makes a difference to that person, both the giver and the receiver of these special moments. But in aggregate, thousands, or in some organizations, hundreds of thousands of these small moments radically change the culture of the organization and give you all the data to understand where the dark spots are, where the bright spots are, the tone. Like, people are using these kinds of programs to measure how men and women speak to each other in the engineering department, because they're concerned about gender equity and that, you know what I mean? Like, the ability, you have such a sense of what's going on in reality when you're not looking in the organization. And this is super critical, because everything about how people interact at work has changed over the last year, and we need new tools. So the organizations that are running these recognition programs, or these life events, or milestone programs, and maximizing those moments, they're thriving. I mean, this is like one of the things, for a penny on the dollar, that radically changes the culture of your organization. And before, that's what leading organizations do. Now you don't have a choice, right? You don't get to just like bring everybody together over lunch in the cafeteria.
Right.
Like, the game has changed. You need new tools and new approach. This is a strategic imperative like it's never been, certainly in the 15 years that I've been on this topic anyway.
It's absolutely true. And, it's interesting, having been part of the digital marketing wave, one thing that becomes really clear in the digital marketing world is you're competing for attention, right? So there's very little difference now between how I spend my time as a personal user versus a business user. So what I mean by that, right, is in marketing, when I'm putting stuff out there to promote, for example, WorkHuman, I know it's competing against other things. Go shop at Nordstrom's, right? Not necessarily just even in the category. Ultimately, you're fighting for attention. It's the same thing with your employees from an HR perspective. So how do you want that to look? And Chris, I love your examples around give people the tools they need to connect with each other, right? Be the orchestrator of those kinds of conversations and learn. I love to learn what goes on the in between, those really natural kinds of things. And just know you're giving people the tools to capture attention. One word you have used, I think it's close to like 20 times you've used this word, and that is intention today. That is really the name of the game here that I'm taking away, and hopefully the folks listening in. This, you have to be intentional with this. When you put employees at the center, that's a new phenomenon from a business perspective. You have to be intentional. What are those relationships you're trying to orchestrate to create this culture of mutual respect? One other thing, Chris, and maybe next time you come back, we'll talk a little bit more about this. The microaggression piece is pretty huge here. And when I think about women and celebrating, how many COVID babies have we had here at WorkHuman alone? There have been so many children that have been born throughout or about to come because of the pandemic. What's been so cool is understanding that our colleagues who are leaving for paternity or maternity leave, that we are their friends. We're now seeing them and supporting them in a new and different way. When they come back, it's seamless. We are in a place now where we've gone backwards, and we're forcing people to make choice between business or personal life. When it comes to working human, this is, not trying to be an infomercial here, but when you place humans at the center, you take the need for that choice away. You change different relationships. You can even tap into stuff like that. That's part of the new work environment. It's so important. So with that, we have one last question, Chris, and that's around technology. And technology has been so interesting, right? You and I have talked about this before. You cannot swing a cat without hitting somebody in the technology industry talking about the employee experience, and more recently, the human workplace, the thing you've been talking about and our boss Eric's been talking about for decades at this point. And when I look at and coming from that world, and those of you joining us, you're all ERP users, you've all been in the HR vendor world or worked with them for years, that answer to employee experience and in the human workplace is being answered from this is about consumer grade technology, about a great experience in a workflow that doesn't look like an ugly screen. It's so much more than that. Technology can be so much more. You started to talk about that. Talk to us a little bit about how you're seeing technology in the human workplace moving forward. What can we really and should we be thinking about it?
Yeah, I think that's you hit on a great point, right? Which is that, a lot of the conversation has been around making it more usable, right? It'd be like, hey, me connecting with my relatives by, making the buttons bigger on the phone, as opposed to social media. Where you're sharing this rich personal experience. Now, we could have a whole conversation on the negatives of social media. And this is the real reality of work, right? Is that there's dogs and cats and, coming into these meetings. But look, what I would say is that it's not about making something that nobody wants to do less hard to do, and more about that there's a completely different category and need for culture building tools. Like that when we talk about intentionally creating an environment where we're reinforcing and reminding people you're part of a team, you're part of something bigger, your contributions matter, this is the direction we're going, there's good stuff happening all the time in the company, you're not just in your little vacuum. I tell you one thing, if I hear one more time in the news somebody quoting someone saying, I've proved that I can work by myself for the last year at home, so therefore I don't understand why we'd ever need to change that, my mind goes nuts, right? Like it doesn't change the fact that we are connected. We don't live on an island, right? And my 14-year-old daughter started her first job this week. And when she came home, and because we were worried, she's a little fussy sometimes. And so we're like, oh, how's this going to go? She's teaching gymnastics. And what is she talking about? She's talking about, oh, and I met this person that I work with, and she's going to this school, and, she likes cats and I like cats. And, the point is that she's talking about the connections she's making with people, not about, oh, I did this task. She was excited to clock in and out, because that means she's going to get paid for the first time. But you know what I mean? Like this is the connections at work. So we need a whole different category of technology in HR, not just that we have the same stuff, but it's easier to use, but a whole category of culture building tools. Right? The ones that foster the feeling of being part of a team, that the reinforcement, the connection with other human beings. And that's a whole I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, but to me, this is now formally built. You don't have the ability to just do these things in the office in the same way, or walk around the office and see who people are doing. You need we need a budget for a whole different category of tools to enable those things to happen and enable the people to help you solve the problem. Because if you think that you're going to create a policy in HR and somehow that's going to fix all these things, but you're not going to use it doesn't matter how many people you have in your company, 100, 1,000, 100,000, they're human beings. Human beings have a need for social connection. If you're not intentionally giving them the tools to connect, then why would you be surprised when they don't feel a connection to? So sure, they get their work done, but they don't feel any loyalty to the company, to the team. They don't think of anything bigger, and somehow something's just quite missing. But maybe I can get it to the next shiny job, you know. And so everybody's looking right now. Everybody's revisiting their whole priorities in life. So you better be assured that you've created an environment to remind them why it makes sense that they belong with you.
Absolutely. And that is the perfect place to close out. And you know, Stephanie, great question around how is culture building different or similar to employee engagement? It's all the same. The engagement lives within the culture. So Chris, what you just talked about really turns that HR technology investment thesis on its head. It is time for a totally new category. The culture piece comes in, Stephanie, with the how, and you got to be intentional. And when we think about engagement, employee engagement, what Chris just talked about is a totally different thing. We're truly thinking about the experience of working. I love the example you just gave about your daughter. That is where so many fun relationships are. You can't get that if you are just simply like, you know, fingers on a keyboard, right? It's just not going to happen. Chris, time always goes by too quickly with you, even without a camera on us in front of other people. Yes. Chris, thank you so much. Phenomenal. Oh my God, we had such a great crowd joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please come back. I'll be back on September 8th for our next bi-weekly series of Recognize This. Chris will be back in November, so stay tuned for that. But we're going to be talking about all things the human workplace. And Chris just gave us another topic we're going to talk about, and that is how do we start looking at our HR technology investment differently to truly build cultures that thrive. Thank you, everybody. Happy summer. Thank you, Chris French. Thank you for being an awesome human. And thank you for the team behind the scenes. Thank you. Bye, everybody.